for inviting me and for two excellent papers. Speaking of Manchester, I mean, C.L.R. James sort of, had some connection with Manchester. He was a member, or leading member of the International African Service Bureau, which paved the way for the fifth Pan-African Congress. Boy, friends with people like George Padmore and so on. And then in sort of perhaps testament to that, 1967, I think the Wally Range Nello James Centre was set up, which lasted at least a couple of decades in terms of football teams and stuff, and Nello James football team and things. Which was great. And also, you mentioned the campaign for against racial discrimination. Selma James, C.L.R. James' wife, I think, served as a figure with him back in the '60s in London. So C.L.R. James. And, well, I suppose one of the other things that both the previous papers struck out was kind of his working class kind of militancy as well. And James, I suppose, was quite rare, certainly among sort of some of the sort of other leading black radical figures in Britain at the time, who always kind of stressed the importance of centrality of the kind of working class in terms of the West anyway, as a kind of central sort of agent for change, which made him quite distinctive, I think. So this is this post got sent about a week ago. It's an amazing thing from next year marks the centenary of the Russian Revolution. This is the 50th anniversary of it, and this is a rally organised by the International Socialists in London, again, Hall, 6th of November. You see C.L.R. James there kind of headlining speakers, Jerry Lawless, C.L.R. James, Trinidadian radical, important Marxist, wrote like Black Jacobins, World Revolution. Jerry Lawless, Irish radical, I think, and became, I think, a councillor in Hackney a bit later on, perhaps. Harry Wicks was, like James, a pioneering British Trotskyist in the 1930s. Before that, a member of the Communist Party in the 20s. And Cliff, sort of Palestinian-born Trotskyist, sort of founding figure of what was then the International Socialists in the 60s. And I think this kind of, James's presence at this rally kind of testifies the way in which he is, one of the sort of leading sort of figures in terms of the British sort of revolutionary left in many ways in the period in the 60s. He also, at this time, 67, been speaking to the IMG type meetings on Malcolm X. He spoke at meetings on C.L.R. in 67 as well in London. David Widgery once described him as one of the leading theorists of British Trotskyism in his Left in Britain book, alongside Cliff and Jerry Healy. But unlike both Cliff and Healy, James in this period was really quite isolated. I'll come on to the, in terms of having his own kind of revolutionary organisation around it. Certainly by the 60s, or even nucleus of any kind of revolutionary organisation, he was really, quite an isolated figure. You can see this in lots of sort of manifestations. In fact, that in New Left Review, I mean, I think he published one short book review, the whole history of New Left Review, despite someone like Stuart Hall being a key figure in New Left Review. He speaks, for example, in 1968, he's on the faculty of the Anti-University of London. He's doing a course on workers' power in history, I think, and yet he's not, this little kind of magazine produced with some of the original publicity, but James is not listed as sort of one of the key figures on it. There's also the Dialectics of Liberation Conference, which Matthew Cale spoke about earlier. Sorry, I missed the paper, but he's again, James, he gives a paper at that. He himself is not, again, in the publicity for that. So he's kind of, and he's talking about the racialised outsider. I don't know whether this is to do with race. I think it's a bit more complicated about, but being a black figure, this is a picture of him in '67. He clearly is kind of finding himself kind of marginalised. It might be because of his distinctive, I think, nature of his own kind of idiosyncratic understanding of kind of Leninism and Marxism, which I'll say a bit more about, which kind of puts him a bit outside of kind of the Trotskyist movement and sort of wider currents. Yet really it's someone who was someone whose group in the 40s in America were one of the first groups to translate and publish, I think the first group to translate and publish extracts from Marx's economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. In some ways, James is a pioneering socialist humanist, you know, kind of, back in 1947, so that's a long time before those writings come to a common knowledge, before we get really kind of socialist humanism in Britain, really, from the late 50s onwards taking off. So he's ahead of the curve. And yet, in fact, James, well, he's being honoured and respected when the black, you know, growing kind of West Indian black community in Britain, 50s and 60s. He tends to, he's still, although he's isolated, he's still able to make an impact. There's a couple of quotes from Christopher Hitchens. He went to see him speak at Ruskin. I think he was involved in inviting him up to Ruskin College, Oxford, at the same time to do a 50th anniversary meeting on the Russian Revolution here in talk. And Hitchens was in IS at the time, International Socialist at the time. He's also, I was looking through Billy Strachan papers at Senate House, and they got the movement for colonial freedom. Billy Strachan was a communist, Jamaican communist, and he's fascinating papers for the movement for colonial freedom. And Hitchens tries to get himself elected in about 67, 68 onto the movement of colonial freedom's kind of executive or whatever. I don't know whether it's foresight among the comrades in the movement for colonial freedom, they didn't elect Hitchens onto their committee at the time. But anyway, this is Hitchens reminiscing about James speaking. He says, I think it's one of his meetings at Ruskin, November 1967. He said, James chose to speak on Vietnam, putting it squarely in the context of imperialism and the resistance to it. And his wonderfully sonorous voice was as enthralling to me as his very striking carriage and appearance. He was getting on by then, but the nimbus of white hair only accentuated his hollow-cheeked, almost anthracite face. For me, a little crackle of current was provided by the reflection that here stood a man who had in real time associated with Trotsky, anti-colonial revolution, and the very early stirrings of the American civil rights movement. About Vietnam, by 67, Hitchens noticed the fantastic web of official lying and bluff about the war that had already been torn irreparably apart. James did not waste any phrases on the revelation of atrocities that were beginning to disturb even Cold War liberals. He was a historian of imperialism, and he knew all that needed to be known about free fire zones and strategic hamlets. He understood them by analogy, from his rigorous study of the French in Haiti, the Spanish in Cuba, the British in South Africa, the Italians in Ethiopia. Such conduct towards lesser peoples scarcely rated a raising of the voice. What was impressive about the Vietnamese, James said coolly, was the proven fact that they wouldn't put up with it any longer and had taken the decision to endure anything. That was how history was made. And Hitchens notes that hearing James speak on the Russian Revolution was such an inspiration. He said, I first began to think that utopianism was too feeble and colourless a term for those few who have the courage to talk of a future we cannot yet fully imagine. And so what I'm going to try to do in this paper is really look at some sense James in the 60s, really, in Britain. And his relationship, really, I suppose, with groups like Solidarity, IS, and perhaps if we have time, some other figures and individuals as well. James was in Britain in the, he comes back, he's forced out of America in 53, so we talk about blacklisting. He's a victim of kind of McCarthyism in a way, where he's been forced out of America, come back to Britain in 53. It was in Britain 53 to 57. So before really the first new left kind of really got going around 56, he'd already left, and he goes back to Trinidad again from 58 to 62, plays a part in the, his country movement towards independence from Britain. And yet by his time there working with Eric Williams and the People's National Movement, as it was, he falls out with Williams crucially over the American base in Trinidad, whether that should be there or not. And by 62 he's come back to Britain just when Eric Williams is declaring independence, giving his independence speech and so on. James comes back to Britain really kind of disappointed, frustrated with how his efforts there had gone. His sort of being too uncritical of Williams at the beginning perhaps, and then have to break with him and not really having much of a base around him. So he's isolated. He comes back to Britain with his wife Selma James and her son Sam Weinstein, and he's kind of, yeah, he's in back. He writes a little booklet, Party Politics of the West Indies, to try and make sense of this, draw up a balance sheet. He builds up a little group of kind of West Indian radicals of Britain around him at that time. Orlando Patterson, Walter Rodney, briefly around that circle, a number of other figures around that. But Leary Constantine is a great cricketer, friend of James, but at that time was the sort of ambassador, Williams was ambassador in Britain. He says James is in a very precarious position, politically and financially. He's doing broadcasts on books and had been commissioned to do Shakespearean broadcasts at the BBC. He's in a very precarious position, not merely in the political field, but in respect of eking out an easy livelihood. Several meetings he has held. His theme is mainly that colonialism continues in Trinidad under a different guise. He's also suffering with his group, his own little group in America, mainly based, had split. It was split at different points. 55, he had his falling out with Ray Hogsbjerg. So that was the end of the original kind of Johnson Forrest tendency, in a sense. And then in 62, he had another split with Grace Lee Boggs and James Boggs. Grace Lee Boggs died end of last year. Chinese-American radical. And he's left with kind of a little, this Martin Glaberman, who's, he's one of the leading figures of what's left of a little group around James, which is basically about a dozen people, I guess, mainly based in the US. And they slowly work and publish a paper called Speak Out. And there's people like George Roy go around as well. So he's another American. So you have people, yes, contacts with kind of American kind of labour historians of slavery and so on. But he's also kind of fallen out by then, by 62, with his other key collaborator, who was this is a publication he wrote in published in 1958, I think, called Facing Reality. New Society, Where to Look for It, with Grace Lee Boggs and Cornelius Castoriadis. But he's already kind of fallen out as well with Castoriadis by 62. But Castoriadis' group in Britain is over writing about a book, actually, the way it was edited in part, unfortunately. But Castoriadis is the leader of Socialism or Barbary French group, and their British counterparts were just kind of getting going a group called Solidarity. More people like Chris Pallis. James kind of, first of all, he tries to link up with this group. James's own sort of Marxism, I should say something briefly about it by this point. It's kind of, I'll let him speak for himself. He still sees himself as a Leninist. He says, the theory and practice of a vanguard, this is in 1964, the theory and practice of a vanguard party is not, repeat, not the central doctrine of Leninism. It is not the central doctrine, it is not even a special doctrine, it is not, it never was. He says, Bolshevism and Leninism did have central doctrines. One was theoretical, the inevitable collapse of capitalism into barbarism. Another was social, but on account of its place in society, its training and its numbers, only the working class could prevent this degradation and reconstruct society. Political action consisted in organising a party to carry out these aims. These were the central principles of Bolshevism. But the idea of a kind of vanguard party, as James would say, a democratic centralist organisation, James was trying to argue wasn't somehow kind of Leninist, which put him a bit out of sync with most of what was seen as Leninist. But it made him, it appealed to the kind of solidarity group on one level, because they also were trying to move away. They often had come out of the Communist Party, and then often a lot of them gone straight into Healy's group, found that very authoritarian, top-down, and were looking for kind of more libertarian kind of socialism. Ken Weller, Solidarity members James coming and talking to them. He gives a talk in 1963, Marxism in 1963, stresses the humanism of Marx again, stresses why he's not a Trotskyist. But in one of the other things he stresses here, it's a nice little passage, he says, his talk, he says, in Britain, there's something which I'm daily astonished. I've written, I'm trying to get published at work in which Shakespeare plays a central role. But in my opinion, I'm an outsider, I'm a stranger. I read the history of the 17th century, I read of the development of a leveller party. I read that brilliant journalist orator, John Lilburne, Thomas Walwyn, these others. What they did so illuminates what is taking place in Britain today and the condition of the mental attitude of the British masses of the people today. I'm astonished the average Marxist revolutionary living in Britain seems to live cheerfully without bothering about that. There's one, Christopher Hill. He says he's kind of an expert on this stuff, but what's needed, James says, is not experts. He said, but in general, the Marxist movement does not touch the English Revolution, a very grave error. The key situations in Britain are between 1800 and 1832, before the Civil War in the 17th century. There modern Britain began, that is what Marxism has to trace. Yeah, I mean, Solidarity would have agreed with that on one level. I think they, still know David Goodway. I think they tried to rope him into writing a pamphlet on actually this kind of stuff, writing on from 1800 to sort of 1832. But by then, E.P. Thompson's Making the English Working Class had come out, which does that properly. And Goodway's like, there's no need for a little pamphlet. It's already been done. It's already done. It's a massive work. So that never got written. And there's, yeah, I mean, there were unfortunately kind of tensions as well, but Solidarity Group were kind of moving slowly kind of away from kind of Marxism a little bit with the influence of Castoriadis, who was also kind of moving away from that. So that was why I guess they also didn't like James's turn perhaps to things like Black Power and some of that. So, so he doesn't have much of, but yeah, as Weller puts it, he says, Solidarity comes to the conclusion the problem was not that the traditional left were not Leninists, not Leninist enough, but they were. There was a clear problem with those like James, who, however residually cleaved to that ideology. James still saw himself as a Leninist. And so that's why James instead turns to IS. He has a much better, more fruitful relationship, I think. There's still tensions with IS, emerging IS groups, so he goes and does meetings and forms the IS and so on. In the early 60s, he writes things for International Socialism Journal, some book reviews. They published one of his early articles in the 40s, critiquing Orthodox Trotskyism. And so he has a better relationship. I think what's key though is, however, one of the reasons why James still gets quite marginalised in the 60s is from 65, he goes back to Trinidad. He's there to report for the Times and the Observer, I think, the English West Indies cricket tour. He goes back to Trinidad, where he left earlier. Eric Williams, now the Premier of Trinidad, puts him under house arrest for 8 weeks. And there's a bit of protests and stuff. James, James is a great sort of founder of kind of movement for West Indian self-government and so on. And Williams has put him under house arrest. So he eventually gets released. And James is so annoyed and bitter, he decides, well, I'm going to stay in Trinidad, or I'm going to come back in Trinidad. I'm going to fight Eric Williams's party. I'm going to build, set up a workers' and farmers' party, he calls it. I'm going to stand against Williams's People's National Movement. Unfortunately, that doesn't go very well. So he stays in Trinidad, has elections there, 66. He stands. It's hard to say. You still get 3% of a vote, and there's debates about whether the vote was fixed. But to get 3% from a kind of standing start, really, as a kind of a left-wing challenge to the main national historic party that's moved to national liberation, is still a start. And he tries to bring together an East Indian population, Black West Indians. It's interesting, but James is really bitter at getting so badly, and comes back to Britain, then goes to Canada, where he gives these lectures, which have now been published, Montreal Lectures of C.L.R. James. In Canada, he's in there from, 66, early 67, he's there. And he's really only in Britain when he comes back from there, for most of 67, mid-67 to late 67, he's in Britain. Then he goes off to Cuba, 68, he's invited to be part of the Revolutionary Intellectuals kind of Congress in Havana. Where James asks kind of awkward questions of his host. He's one of the few people there to actually ask about kind of what rights do actually workers have to organise independently in trade unions and stuff. So James is still quite awkward figure, even though he's obviously still going along with very much kind of, he's seen as kind of a bit pro-Castro perhaps as well for some on the left, like IS perhaps, in this period. And then he's off in 68, he's off to Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda. He's sort of coming and going. Britain's his base, but he's coming and going. And then finally, late 68, he gets the invitation to go back to America. McCarthy has mentioned, he's kind of barred from America, but then with the rise of Black Power movement in America, the students basically saying, we want James to, who is this James guy? He's written all his books, we want James to come lecture. So eventually, 68, he's able to go back legally, work in America. You can't, interestingly, talking about blacklisting, James in the 50s and 60s tries to get, I think 50s anyway, tries to get some sort of university post teaching in Britain, but he can't. He's like Deutsche. Whereas at Deutsche, he's sort of blacklisted essentially from that. However, he does make 2 key interventions at the time in Britain, which I haven't really, got that much time to talk about. But briefly,
I've got a minute.
I've got a minute. I've got a minute. I was pointing to him, people asked me about, I'm in the paper online, but basically, one of them's Workers' Control Conference in Coventry in 1967, where he has a famous interaction with E.P. Thompson. James has kind of had a critique of the kind of May Day manifesto there. And the other famous thing is the Dialectics of Liberation Conference, where he challenges Stokely Carmichael. So my point, I suppose, is that James is, even though he's marginalised in Britain, very kind of, he's coming and going in 67, he's still able to kind of make important interventions, and clearly, as the Hitchens quote showed, able to make an impression, at least for some of the sort of more radical elements of that student milieu in 67. I suppose, just if I've still got 30 seconds, is I suppose some of the reason he doesn't build up a group out of this in the 60s himself is that partly is not there, but also James's lack of clarity really about once you've written off building a kind of a Leninist party, or trying to at least aspire to try and build that kind of group, but you're still calling yourself a Leninist. You mean students would come along, hear James talk passionately, eloquently, authoritatively about Marxism and Marxist theory, but then when the question came up, what do we actually concretely do in the here and now, James is unable to really give him a very concrete answer about that. And you can see that in the Montreal lectures which have been published. If you look at some of the debates and transcripts there from the audience interactions, they kind of press him on it, these students in Canada, trying to ask him, what do we then do? And James just kind of ducks it and kind of keeps it quite abstract. So I think that's one of ultimately why James perhaps doesn't really build out a group, and why ultimately facing reality group itself winds itself. Marty Gladman decides to wind it up in 1971 against James's wishes, and Gladman just concentrates on trying to keep as much of James's writings in print then as possible.